Learning started like every other morning. Emily Carter woke up at 5:45, put on her work clothes before her eyes were fully open, drove her 12-year-old pickup truck through the quiet streets of Harlan Creek, Colorado, before the sun had finished deciding whether or not it wanted to show up. The radio played something she wasn't listening to. The heater rattled the way it always did. The town she had lived in her entire life rolled past her windows like a painting she had memorized so long ago. She no longer really saw it anymore. She was thinking about a fuel injector. That was the kind of woman Emily Carter was. The kind who daydreamed about vacations or worried about what people thought of her hair or spent Saturday nights scrolling through other people's lives on her phone. Emily thought about machines. She thought about the way a V-twin engine sounded different at 4,000 RPMs versus 4,500. About torque curves and brake pad wear and the specific way an alternator started to fail 6 weeks before it actually quit. She heard things other people didn't hear. She noticed things other people walked right past. Her daddy used to call it a gift. Most of the men who brought their bikes to Carter's garage called it something else when they thought she wasn't listening. The garage had been her father's. Thomas Carter had built it with his own hands when Emily was 4 years old, south of Main Street, in a building that had once been a feed store. He'd raised her in that garage the way other fathers raised their daughters in church pews or on baseball diamonds. She learned to read the way most kids learn, but she learned to listen the way mechanics do, with her whole body, corners, her hands pressed flat against an engine case, feeling the vibration tell its story through her palms. Miss Carter died of a heart attack when Emily was 19. Left her the garage, the tools, a truck with 160,000 miles on it, a reputation in Harlan Creek that had two completely different meanings depending on who you asked. To the people who actually needed their machines fixed, Carter's garage meant honesty, precision, and the rare miracle of getting exactly what you paid for. Who had never set foot inside the place, the ones who made their judgments from the parking lot or the diner booth across the street, it meant something that made them smirk a little when they said it. That's the place run by the girl. Emily was 27 now. She had heard that smirk in people's voices so many times that it had stopped making her angry and started making her tired. There was a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from spending years proving something that should never have needed proving in the first place. And Emily carried that exhaustion the way she carried everything else quietly, without complaint, packed down somewhere underneath her sternum where it didn't get in the way of the work. It was what mattered. The work was the only thing she had ever trusted completely. Out of the garage at 6:15, and the first thing she noticed was that Marcus Webb had left the bay door unlatched again. Marcus was her one full-time employee, 22 years old, but generally talented with his hands, and so constitutionally incapable of remembering to secure anything when he left for the night. Emily had talked to him about it 3 times. She was going to have to talk to him a 4th time, and she already knew how that conversation would go, as Marcus would look at the floor, say, "Yes, ma'am," in the voice of a man who genuinely meant it, and then do the exact same thing again in 2 weeks, because his brain simply did not retain this particular category of information. She didn't fire him because she couldn't afford to, also because he was good, and also because she recognized something in him that she recognized in herself, the way a person could be completely present inside a machine and completely absent from the rest of the world at the same time. Latched the door. She made coffee. She pulled out her work order for the day. That was when she saw the notation she had added the night before, her own handwriting in red pen. Hendricks bike RE check. Nothing wrong. The Hendricks bike had come in 2 days ago. Belonged to a man named Gary Hendricks, who ran a landscaping company out of Pueblo and rode a 2018 Harley-Davidson Road Glide that he kept in almost obsessive condition. It in for a routine service oil change, brake inspection, ahead of what he described as a big charity ride through the mountains. He'd mentioned almost as an afterthought that he was riding with a big group. Emily had done the service. She had done it correctly and thoroughly at her, the way she did everything. And then near the end of the job, she had noticed something that shouldn't have been there. Normal, easy to miss. A thing that most mechanics, even experienced ones, would have looked at and told themselves it was a manufacturer variation or a previous repair or just one of those things you see sometimes on a bike with some miles on it. Didn't tell herself that. Emily looked at it more carefully, and the more carefully she looked, the more wrong it felt. It was a modification to the rear brake system, not the kind of modification you did to improve performance. Kind of modification a careful owner made to customize his ride. It was the other kind, the kind that looked on the surface, nothing at all, but had been placed with a very specific and very deliberate purpose that had nothing to do with a bike running better. Photographed it. She had written her note, told herself she would look again in the morning with fresh eyes. It was morning. She pulled Gary Hendrix's file, her photographs on the workbench, and looked at them in the flat white light of the fluorescence. It dropped. She picked up the phone and called Gary Hendrix. He didn't answer. She called him 4 times in the next hour and a half. 4 times, no answer. She left 2 voicemails. She sent a text message. The PD is, she went back to her notes and looked at the photographs again and pulled out her reference manuals and cross-checked what she was seeing against 3 different sources. As Emily Carter was not the kind of woman who acted on a feeling. She acted on evidence. She built a case the way her father had taught her slow, one confirmed fact stacked on top of another until the structure was solid enough to stand on. By 8:30 in the morning, the structure was solid. What she had found in Gary Hendrix's brake system was not a manufacturer variation, a previous repair. It was not one of those things you saw sometimes on a bike with miles on it. It was a deliberate alteration designed to cause catastrophic brake failure under specific high-stress conditions, road conditions. The kind of conditions that existed on the route Gary Hendrix had mentioned, charity ride route through the passes north of Harlan Creek, he was planning to do today. Emily stood in her garage holding a photograph of a man's rear brake assembly and felt something cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature. Somebody had set up Gary Hendrix's motorcycle to fail. And Gary Hendrix was somewhere she couldn't reach him. On his way to a charity ride with a group she didn't know. Mountain road she couldn't stop traffic on, and the ride was, she checked the time. It was starting in less than 2 hours. She called the police first, not because she thought it would work. She called the police first because she was a rational person who believed in doing things in the right order. And the right order, when you potential criminal activity, was to report it to the appropriate authority. A dispatch put her through to an officer named Reyes who listened to her explain what she had found, asked her to describe it again, more slowly, listened a second time, and then asked her what kind of bike it was. She told him. And you're saying someone tampered with it? Yes. I'm saying someone deliberately modified the rear brake assembly to cause failure under high-speed descending conditions. On a mountain route, during a ride that's starting, she checked the clock again in about 90 minutes. There was a pause on the other end of the line that Emily would remember for a long time afterward. Not because it was long, because it was the specific quality of silence that meant the person on the other end was deciding something. And the thing they were deciding was not whether to believe her, whether it was worth the effort not to. Ma'am, do you have the vehicle owner's contact information? I've been trying to reach him for an hour and a half. He's not answering. Can you bring the motorcycle into the station so we can have someone take a look at? It's not here. He picked it up yesterday evening. The ride is leaving in 90 minutes. Officer, these are motorcycles on mountain passes. If the brakes go out, I understand your concerns, ma'am. I'll make a note and see if we can get someone to reach out to the organizers. Is there anything else I can help you with today? Emily stood in her garage with the phone in her hand and looked at the photographs on her workbench. Oh, she said, thank you for your time. She hung up. Called Marcus next. He picked up on the second ring. It was unusual enough that she wondered for a moment if he was sick. Hey, she said, I need you to come in early. There was a sound in the background she couldn't identify. I'm kind of in the middle of something. Urgent? Yes. How urgent? I don't know yet. Just that Hendrix bike we serviced Tuesday. You remember it? The road glide? Oh yeah. Big gray one. What about it? Did you notice anything unusual when you did the pre-inspection? Here I took over. Another pause. This one longer. Unusual how? The rear brake assembly. Anything that looked off to you. Terrified. Out of place. She heard him thinking. Marcus was slow to speak, and she had learned to wait for him. I noticed the rear caliper looked newer than the rest of the system. I figured he had it replaced somewhere else. Didn't note it down because I didn't think it was. He stopped. What did you find? Come in as soon as you can, Emily said. And Marcus, do you remember him saying anything about where the ride was starting from? The charity ride? He mentioned it was staging over at the community center parking lot on Route 9. Hi. What's going on, Emily? She was already reaching for her keys. I'll explain when you get here, she said. Lock your house. She drove to the community center first. It was the wrong call. Strategically, she would realize that later, when she had time to think about it, but it was the right call humanly, which was the only kind of call she knew how to make. Routers. If there was a chance Gary Hendrix was already there, if there was a chance she could pull him aside, show him the photographs on her phone, make him understand before the engine started and the column got moving, that was where she needed to be. She pulled into the parking lot at 9:15, and what she saw made her throat tighten. The parking lot was full, not just Gary Hendrix and a few friends. The parking lot was full of motorcycles. She counted quickly, lost track, it again, 24 at minimum, maybe more. Ranked in rows with a precision that spoke to experience and habit and a group that had done this many times before. The riders were gathered in clusters, some eating from a table of donated food near the community center entrance, checking their bikes, some just talking with that comfortable ease of people who had known each other a long time. And then she saw the colors. She wasn't from that world. She knew enough to know what she was looking at, but only barely. Patterns on the vests, the specific arrangement of them, the way the men wearing them carried themselves with something that was not quite arrogance and not quite confidence, but something that lived in the territory between the two. It told her enough. These were not casual riders. These were Hell's Angels. 34 Hell's Angels motorcycles, all serviced at some point in the last 3 months through a rotating system of garages in the region. At least 3 of them, she was almost certain, based on what she had found and what she had started to piece together, carrying the same hidden modification as Gary Hendrix's road glide. She sat in her truck in the parking lot and felt the scale of what she was looking at expand suddenly, the way a storm on the horizon looks manageable until you realize it's moving faster than you thought and it's already overhead. One bike, this was a trap, a coordinated, premeditated trap designed to send multiple motorcycles into catastrophic brake failure on a mountain pass at speed with no warning. She got out of her truck. The first person she approached was a man standing at the edge of the group, separate from the others, with the particular quality of stillness that she associated with people who were always watching, always processing, even when they looked like they were doing nothing at all. He was somewhere in his late 50s, she guessed, a face that weather and years and a life lived largely outdoors had carved into something that communicated both experience and patience in equal measure. He was watching the rest of the group with the quiet authority of someone who had not needed to raise his voice in a very long time. I walked up to him and she said, "Excuse me, I need to speak to whoever is in charge of this ride." He looked at her dismissively, not the way some of the men she dealt with looked at her. Automatic recalibration that happened when they registered young woman and immediately started adjust their expectations downward. That are the way someone looks when they're genuinely trying to read the full text of a situation. "That would be me," he said. "Jack Reynolds. And you are?" "Emily Carter. I run the garage on South Main, Carter's Garage. I serviced one of your rider's bikes 2 days ago, Larry Hendrix, and I found something in the brake system that I need you to look at right now." Jack Reynolds didn't move immediately. He continued to look at her, and she watched him make the same calculation she had seen on Officer Reyes's face, not quite skepticism, not quite dismissal, but the preliminary assessment of whether the situation required his full attention. "There's something," he said. She held up her phone and showed him the photograph, got a phone from her, and looked at it. He looked at it for long enough that she knew he was seeing what she was seeing. He had the kind of baseline mechanical knowledge to understand what he was looking at, even if he needed her to explain the specifics. "This is on Hendrix's bike," he said. "Yes, but I don't think it's just Hendrix's bike." She took a breath. "Mr. Reynolds, can you tell me which other bikes in this group were recently serviced at a facility called Mountain Valley Auto and Firehouse out on County Road 7? Something shifted in his face. Alarm, exactly. Something more controlled than alarm. A kind of internal recalibration that an experienced man made when new information landed and he was deciding in real time what category it belonged in. "Why are you asking me that?" he said. "I think whoever modified Hendrix's bike also had access to other bikes that went through that facility. And if I'm right, there are at least 2 or 3 other motorcycles in this group with the same modification." She looked at him steadily. "There was Mr. Reynolds, I've been trying to reach Gary for almost 2 hours. Others. Nobody answered at that facility when I called this morning. They told me they'd make a note. I'm standing here because I don't know what else to do, and I know what I found. And if this group rides out onto that mountain route today, something very bad is going to happen." He was quiet for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then he said, "Show me." They walked together to Gary Hendrix's motorcycle, and Emily crouched beside it and showed Jack Reynolds, their step, exactly what she had found, explaining it in plain language without talking down to him, the way she explained things to the owners who actually wanted to understand what was happening with their machines. Jack crouched beside her and listened without interrupting. There's one question, then another, and his questions were precise in a way that told her he had a solid working knowledge of the systems she was describing. He was not an expert, but he understood enough to follow her reasoning, followed it completely. When she finished, he stood up and was quiet for a moment. "You're sure?" he said. "Yes. Not a previous repair. A manufacturer thing. No. The modification is deliberate. Opponents that were changed are specific to creating failure under the conditions of this route. High-speed descending, repeated brake application, elevated temperatures. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing." Jack Reynolds looked at the motorcycle for another moment. Then he turned and looked at the rest of the group right across the parking lot, finishing their food and checking their gear and moving toward their bikes with the comfortable efficiency of people getting ready to do something they had done many times before. "How many bikes do you think are compromised?" he said. "I don't know for certain. 3 is my minimum estimate. If they had access to bikes serviced at that facility in the last 6 weeks, it could be higher. We had 6 bikes through Mountain Valley in the last month," he said. His voice was completely level. Gary was one of them. Emily felt something settle in her chest. Relief, something harder than relief. The specific feeling of having been right about something you desperately wished you were wrong about. There could be up to 6 compromised bikes in this group," she said. Not at once. He turned back to look at the group. "Hey," he said, "here's what we're going to do." What followed was one of the more remarkable things Emily Carter had ever watched happen. Jack Reynolds walked back into the center of the group and without any visible urgency, without any tone that would set off alarm or confusion, moved through the clusters of riders with a series of quiet, direct conversations. She watched him from where she stood, able to hear what he said, but able to see the effect of it in the way each man he talked to changed his posture slightly, the way attention sharpened and casual morning energy became something more focused. Within 10 minutes, the entire group had shifted from departure mode into something else. Nobody looked panicked. Nobody raised their voice. But 6 specific motorcycles had been separated from the rest, and 6 specific riders were now standing in a loose cluster near the edge of the parking lot, waiting, with the controlled patience of people who had been told something serious and were choosing to respond to it seriously. Came back to where Emily was standing. I need you to walk through each of those 6 bikes, he said. Tell me what you find. Right now? Right now, she looked at the cluster of motorcycles. She looked at the riders standing beside them, men ranging from their 40s to their 60s, of them watching her with expressions that were carefully neutral in the way that careful neutrality can sometimes be its own kind of pressure. Oh, she said. She went to the first bike. The first bike was clean. She went through it carefully, quickly. The way she did everything, this pressing her hands against the brake components and tracing the lines and checking the caliper mountings and reading the bike the way she had been reading machines since she was 9 years old, standing on a step stool in her father's garage. Clean, unmodified. She moved to the second bike. The second bike was clean too. She was starting to doubt herself, not her analysis. She was certain of her analysis, but her estimate of the scope. Maybe she had overestimated. Maybe it was only Hendrix's bike, and she had pushed this too far. It made something bigger than it was when she got to the third bike and found it immediately. She didn't say anything for a moment. She just kept looking, making certain, tracing it all the way through the system to confirm what she was seeing. One, she said, standing up. The rider standing beside that bike, a man named, she would later learn, was Carver, somewhere in his mid-50s, quiet intensity about him that reminded her a little of. Jack looked at his motorcycle and then looked at her. Me, he said. She showed him. He looked at what she was pointing to for a long time. His face didn't change, but something changed in his eyes. Something that moved through them quickly and then was gone, down and controlled the way men like Dennis Carver packed things down and controlled them. Right, he said. She moved to the fourth bike. The time she had gone through all 6, she had found the modification in 3 of them Hendrix's, Carver's, and a man named Roy Altman's, and the remaining 3 were clean. She stood in the parking lot and gave Jack her findings, and he listened to all of it without expression. And then he was quiet for a moment. Bikes, he said. Yes. All serviced at Mountain Valley. Yes. He was looking at something past her shoulder. She turned and saw that the rest of the group had spread out a little, not moving toward their bikes, not preparing to leave, just giving the situation space in the way that people gave serious conversations space when they could tell something significant was happening. Rides are organized months in advance, Jack said. Records get filed. The staging area, the waypoints, it's not exactly secret information. Emily thought about what he was saying and felt the temperature of the situation change again. Somebody had the route, she said. Somebody had the route, timing, and access to the specific bikes. She looked at him. A random crime? No, he said. It's not. The word hung in the air between them for a moment. Emily felt the full weight of what that meant descend on her slowly. Heavy things sometimes descended not all at once, in layers, each one adding to the last, until the total was something she had to brace herself against. It had been planned, carefully, patiently, over months, and had mapped this group's movements, obtained their route, arranged access to their motorcycles, and installed a system designed to send 3 of them into brake failure on a mountain pass at speed. An accident, not opportunism, execution. Mr. Reynolds, she said, and she heard something in her own voice that she hadn't intended to let through, a tremor of something that was not quite fear, but was close enough to fear that she didn't try to name it more specifically than that. How much does your group know about the people who arranged the service at Mountain Valley? Jack looked at her steadily. What are you asking? I'm asking who referred your riders there. As a facility like that doesn't just pick up Hell's Angels business through the yellow pages. Remember, somebody made an introduction. Something moved through Jack Reynolds's face. Not surprised she didn't think he was capable of surprise in any conventional sense of the word. A specific recognition. The kind that happened when a pattern you had been watching for a long time suddenly resolved into a shape you could name. There was a man, he said slowly. Came to us about 8 months ago. Said he had connections in the regional supplier network. Said he could get us better service rates at facilities along our regular routes. What was his name? Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Us, he said. Daniel Cross. The name meant nothing to Emily right then. It would mean something later. Right now, what it meant was that the situation had a face, an abstract threat, not a mechanical malfunction, an accident, a person who had planned this, who had moved peace into position over 8 months. Enemy stood close enough to this group to learn their routes and their habits and their trust offers facilities, and who had used that closeness to set up something that was designed to kill. She asked. I know of him, Jack said, and his voice was carefully level in a way that told her the leveling was deliberate. We had a business arrangement that went bad a few years ago. Blamed us. We knew he blamed us. I didn't know he blamed us enough for this. He said that last sentence with a flatness that was more disturbing than anger would have been. Emily looked at the 3 compromised motorcycles sitting in the parking lot. She looked at the men who had been standing beside them, who were now gathered in a quiet cluster at the edge of the lot, talking in low voices with the contained urgency of people managing a serious situation without letting it become a crisis. What I want to do, she said. Jack looked at her for a moment. It was a different quality of look than the one he had given her in the beginning. Not the assessing look of a man trying to figure out who she was, but of a man who had already figured it out and was deciding how to proceed based on that knowledge. At first, he said, nobody rides today. She nodded. I'm going to make some calls, not to the local police. He paused. Well, we have people we work with for situations like this. She nodded again. Third, he paused. I need you to write down everything you found, every detail. The specific components, the modifications, paragraphs you took when you noticed the first one, whole sequence, everything. I can do that. And I need you to be willing to repeat all of it to the people I'm going to call. She looked at him. Yes, she said simply. Jack nodded. He looked at her for one more moment with that quality of directness that she had noticed from the beginning. And then he said something that she had not expected. You came here alone, he said. The police didn't help her. You had no guarantee we'd listen to you. You came anyway. Emily didn't say anything. And anything to say to that. Why? He said. She looked at the 3 compromised motorcycles. She thought about what they were capable of at speed on a descent with riders who had no warning. About the physics of it, which she understood precisely, which had kept her awake most of the previous night. Because I knew what would happen if I didn't, she said. Oh. Jack Reynolds was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said. Then he pulled out his phone and started making calls. Marcus arrived at the garage a few minutes after Emily got back, out of breath and confused, and she spent 20 minutes walking him through everything she had found and everything she had done. The workbench stool and listened, and his face went through several different expressions before settling on something that was mostly stunned. 3 bikes, he said. 3 bikes confirmed. Possibly more if there were services through Mountain Valley we don't know about. And the police said they'd make a note. Marcus looked at her. And you went to the community center parking lot, the pub, by yourself, and walked up to the president of a Hells Angels chapter by yourself. He introduced himself as Jack Reynolds. I don't know his actual title in the organization. Emily. Marcus pressed both hands flat on the workbench the way he did when he was trying to find solid ground in a conversation. This is what you just described is, I know, sorry. Marcus. He stopped. I know, she said, again. He had to. He looked at her for a long time. Photographed the original modification 2 days ago. He said slowly. Sure you knew how big this was. Yes. And nobody listened. No, and your response to nobody listening was to just, he made a gesture that encompassed the whole of it. Police call. The drive to the community center, a lot full of Hells Angels, all of it. Do it yourself. She looked at him calmly. What else was I going to do? He didn't have an answer for that. They spoke for a while. Outside, a truck went past on the street, others, and then another, and the sounds of the morning continued, the way morning sounds always continued indifferent to the things that happened inside human lives, carrying on with their own rhythm regardless. So what happens now? Marcus said finally. Jack Reynolds is making calls. I'm going to write up a full technical report of everything I found, paragraphs, and give it to whoever those calls produce. She sat down on the other stool and picked up her coffee, which had gone cold, and then I guess we find out who Daniel Cross is and why he decided to do this. Marcus was quiet for a moment. You said that name like you know something about it, he said. The name now, Jack told me. That's all I know. She paused. Someone who plans something like this for 8 months doesn't just have a grudge. They have a reason they've spent 8 months telling themselves is good enough. And that kind of reason usually goes pretty deep. Marcus looked at her. You think there's more to it? I think there's always more to it, she said. I think the bike was just what I could see. And I think whatever I can't see yet is going to matter more. She looked out through the garage bay door at the street beyond. Ordinary morning, moving past in its ordinary way, held her cold coffee in both hands. And she thought about the 3 motorcycles in that parking lot, her botters, and the 8 months of planning that had gone into them, and the name Daniel Cross, and the look on Jack Reynolds' face when he said it. Something broke in that man a long time ago, and it broke in a direction that pointed straight at this parking lot on this morning. She thought, and whatever broke it is the thing I need to understand. She didn't know yet that she was right. She didn't know yet that the story she had stumbled into the edges of was much larger than 3 modified brakes and 1 bad service facility. She didn't know yet what Daniel Cross had lost, or what he had built from the wreckage of that loss. How many people he had pulled into the machinery of his resentment without them ever knowing they were inside it. She would learn all of that. But right now, she sat in her father's garage with cold coffee photographs and a technical report to write. And somewhere across town, 24 motorcycles that were not leaving today sat in a parking lot, while Jack Reynolds' phone calls moved quietly through networks that did not appear in directories. And the morning continued, and Daniel Cross, wherever he was, did not yet know that his 8 months of careful work had been unraveled by a 27-year-old mechanic who woke up at 5:45 and thought about fuel injectors on the way to work. He would find out soon. And that was when the real trouble would start. Jack Reynolds made 4 phone calls in 18 minutes. Debbie knew this because she counted. She was standing close enough to hear the rhythm of his voice without hearing the words, and she tracked each call by the way his posture changed between them, more relaxed on the first one, her on the second, very still on the third, and on the fourth, he turned his back to the group entirely and walked to the far edge of the parking lot and stood there for almost 6 minutes without moving. When he came back, his face told her exactly nothing. That in itself told her something. We're going to need your garage, he said. She blinked. My garage. The compromised bikes need to come off the road. We need a secure space to document what you found before we move anything or touch anything else. And I need my people to be somewhere that isn't a public parking lot. He looked at her steadily. Can you make that happen? Emily thought about her schedule for the day, about the 2 oil changes and the tire rotation and the electrical diagnostics she had booked for the afternoon, about how long it would take her to call those customers and reschedule. Yes, she said. She called Marcus on the way back to the garage and told him to clear the bays and move her personal truck to the street and unlock the side entrance. He didn't ask questions this time. He just said, okay, how long do I have? 40 minutes, maybe. Okay. She heard him start moving before she even hung up. The compromised bikes arrived at Carter's garage. 45 minutes later, rolling in one at a time with their riders walking them by hand rather than riding them. As Emily had been very specific about that. She had told Jack, and Jack had told his riders, and nobody argued, told her something about the respect that moved through this group when Jack Reynolds spoke. However, was the last one through the bay door, putting his bike in with the specific, careful energy of a man who was managing something with his hands because his mind needed somewhere to put itself. Emily, as he cleared the threshold and gave her a short nod that communicated more than most people managed with full sentences. Back. Then she closed the bay door and got to work. Documented everything. Every modification on all three bikes, photographed from every angle, measured where measurement was relevant, described in the technical language she would need if this ever went to court. And she was already thinking about that, already constructing the report in her head with the precision of someone who understood that what she documented now would be the foundation of whatever came next. Others worked beside her without being asked, handing her tools, holding lights, writing down the measurements she called out, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who had spent enough time in this garage to know how to be useful without getting in the way. Jack Reynolds stood in the corner of the bay and watched without interfering. Two of his men stood near the door. The others had dispersed, she didn't know where. Others didn't ask. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes to complete the documentation. It was done. She printed everything from the garage's ancient inkjet printer, the photographs, the measurements, the written descriptions, and organized it into a folder that she handed to Jack without ceremony. But he took it and looked at the first page for a moment. You do this kind of work often? Documentation. No. No, how? Where did you learn? My father. She paused. Marauders. He believed that if something was worth noticing, it was worth recording so completely that someone else could understand exactly what you saw, even if they weren't there to see it themselves. Jack looked at the folder in his hands. Man. Yes, she said. He was. There was a beat of silence, and then Jack looked up at her and said, I need to tell you something about Daniel Cross. She waited. But he wasn't always the kind of person who does something like this, Jack said. The way he said it, not as an excuse, not as sympathy, but as a fact that he was still working out how to hold, told her that whatever he was about to say was something he had been carrying for a while. 3 years ago, he was a businessman. Regional logistics, transport coordination, some supply chain work that overlapped with industries we operate in. A business arrangement with him. It worked for about 2 years. And then it stopped working. Jack was quiet for a moment. There was a contract, a significant one. Cross had been positioning himself as the primary coordinator. Contract fell through, not because of anything we did, through because the company on the other end had internal restructuring that killed the deal. Cross lost a substantial amount of money he had already spent in anticipation. Emily waited. Jack said that we were responsible, that we had influenced the outcome to cut him out. We hadn't, but he had decided, and by the time we understood how far that decision had gone inside him, it was too late to have a conversation about it. Did you try? Jack's jaw moved slightly. Once. He wasn't interested. Emily thought about that. About a man who had spent 3 years building a story in which he was the victim and someone else was responsible. Feeding that story every day until it became the only story he knew how to tell. The story required a conclusion, and the conclusion required action, and the action required 8 months of planning and 6 service facilities and 3 modified brake systems on a mountain route in Colorado. She said. It wasn't a question. Jack looked at her carefully. What makes you say that? Because what I found in those brake systems wasn't improvised. Modifications were technically precise. Whoever made them understood the failure mechanics thoroughly enough to calibrate the timing to make the failure happen under specific conditions rather than immediately. Not something a logistics businessman learns from YouTube. She looked at him steadily. He had someone with mechanical expertise, someone who knew exactly how to make it look like a maintenance failure rather than sabotage. Jack's expression shifted by a fraction. We've been thinking the same thing. Do you have a name? We have a possibility. He paused. There's a man Cross has been associated with for the last 18 months. Her military worked in logistics adjacent fields before that. Hartley. Wade Hartley. He watched her face. Know that name? Emily thought. No. Mountain Valley Auto and Cycle was opened 14 months ago, Jack said. Owner of record is a shell company. Hartley's name appears nowhere in the paperwork, but the facility's operational patterns, the way appointments were scheduled, the way records were kept, the specific services that were and weren't offered, they match a pattern we've seen connected to him before. Emily looked at the 3 motorcycles lined up in her bay. About the precision of what had been done to them. About someone who knew enough about failure mechanics to calibrate a brake modification to survive a pre-ride inspection, but fail under sustained mountain descent conditions. About the patience that required. The knowledge, deliberate, methodical application of expertise toward harm. It, she said quietly. Jack frowned slightly. Heard it. Whoever did the modifications, they enjoyed it. She moved to Dennis Carver's bike and pointed to the caliper assembly without touching it. There. This is precise work. This is someone who takes pride in what they do. They concealed it. It's almost elegant. In a horrible way. Most people who do something like this in a hurry make it messy. This isn't messy. This is someone who sat with it. Their time. She looked at Jack. Hartley. His background specifically. What was his role in the military? Jack was quiet for a moment. Ordnance, he said. The word landed in the garage like a stone dropped into still water. Emily heard Marcus stop moving behind her. Ordnance. A man trained in the precise science of making things fail in specific ways at specific times under specific conditions, for whom the calibration of a brake failure was not a stretch of expertise, but a natural extension of skills he had spent years developing in a completely different context. Where is Hartley now? She said. We don't know. And Cross? We don't know that either. Jack's voice was completely level. The people I called this morning are working on it. Something else. Emily waited. The route, Jack said. The specific mountain route for today's ride. It wasn't filed publicly, but it was distributed internally through our own communication channels 3 weeks ago. She understood immediately, which means Cross didn't get it from a public source. No, he got it from inside. Yes, the silence that followed that word was of a particular quality, not comfortable, not easy, the kind of silence that sits in a room after something irrevocable has been said, and everyone present is adjusting to its weight. Someone in Jack Reynolds' organization had given the route to Daniel Cross, someone who was part of this group, who wore the same colors, who rode the same road, had been part of the mechanism that was supposed to send 3 of their own brothers into brake failure on a mountain pass. Emily looked at Jack, and he looked at her, and she saw something in his face that she had not seen there before, not panic, not grief exactly, but something in the neighborhood of both, held in check by the kind of discipline that only came from years of practice. Hello. Does your organization know you're telling me this? She said. Oh, why are you telling me? He was quiet for a long moment. Because you're the only person in this situation who has no stake in any of it, he said. Have a side. You just have what you found. He looked at the folder in his hands. Right now, that makes you the most reliable person in the room. Emily absorbed that. About what it meant, not as a compliment, as a structural fact about the situation. She thought about the inside source, someone who had looked their brothers in the face at breakfast and made a decision to hand a map of their deaths to a man nursing a 3-year-old grudge. You have a suspect, she said. It wasn't a question, but he answered it anyway. We have someone whose behavior has changed in the last 4 months, he said. Someone who has been asking questions about logistics and scheduling that he has no operational reason to be asking, who has been quieter than usual, pulling back from the group. That's not evidence. No, not. He paused, but combined with the fact that he was present at the meeting where the route was finalized, and that he left that meeting early and made a phone call we can't account for, it's enough to make us look harder. Emily looked at the folder in his hands. Paragraphs visible through the clear plastic cover, the caliper assemblies, identified brake lines, the specific alterations that she had spent 2 hours documenting with precise care. What's his name, she said. Jack shook his head. Not yet, until we're certain. She understood that and respected it. An accusation like that, inside an organization like this one, versus in the middle of a situation like this, certainty mattered. Knowing it wrong would be worse than knowing nothing. Hi, she said. Then Marcus spoke up from behind her, and his voice had a quality she had not heard in it before, tightly elevated, the voice of someone who had just noticed something and wasn't sure whether to say it out loud. She turned. He was holding his phone out toward her. His face was doing something complicated. I was looking up Daniel Cross while you were talking, trying to find any public information, news articles, filings, whatever, and I found something. He held the phone out further. You need to look at this. She took the phone. The screen showed a business filing from 18 months ago, a Colorado incorporation document for a company called Cross Valley Logistics and Coordination Services. Registered agent, principal address, standard documentation. She scanned it quickly, not sure what she was looking for. Then she saw it. The listed business address for Cross Valley Logistics and Coordination Services was a commercial property in Harlan Creek, Colorado. Specifically, it was the address of the building 2 blocks east of Carter's garage that had stood empty for 3 years and that Emily had passed every single working day without once stopping to think about who owned it. I looked up at Marcus. His face confirmed what she already knew he had found. She looked at Jack Reynolds. He's local, she said. Cross is based here, in this town. Something moved through Jack's face fast, gone before it fully surfaced. How local, he said. Blocks from this garage. The silence that followed was very short and very dense. Then Jack turned to the man standing near the door, the one whose name Emily didn't know. A man in his late 40s with a stillness about him that reminded her of bedrock, and said one word, Tommy. Tommy moved without further instruction, pulling out his own phone and stepping outside the bay door. Emily heard him talking too low to distinguish words. Impressed efficiency of someone who had been trained to transmit information quickly and accurately under conditions that did not allow for error. Turned back to Emily. Do not leave this garage, he said, phrased as a request. She looked at him. Because if Cross is 2 blocks from here, and he's been monitoring this situation, which is possible, this was a tightly planned operation, and people who plan that tightly tend to watch their work closely. Then he may already know the ride didn't leave today. And if he knows that, he knows something went wrong. And if something went wrong, he's going to want to know what. And who Emily felt the implication of that settle over her like cold air. You think he'd come here, she said. I think he might send someone here, Jack said. Find out what happened. He paused. Are you the only mechanic in this town who would have had access to those bikes? She thought about it. There are 2 other shops in Harlan Creek. Neither of them did the level of service work that Carter's garage did. For the specific service, Hendricks brought in yes. Effectively yes. Then if Cross is trying to figure out what went wrong with his plan, garage is the first place he would look. Jack's voice was even. Oh, you're not leaving. Emily looked at the 3 compromised motorcycles in her bay. She looked at the folder on her workbench. She looked at Marcus, who was holding his phone, and whose face had gone from complicated to something simpler and fundamental, which was scared. She felt something settle in her own chest, not calm exactly. A kind of clarity that came when the situations stopped being theoretical and became immediate and real. She said. Then we use that. Jack looked at her. If he sends someone here, she said, or if he comes himself, we know that in advance. We know this garage is the logical target. That's an advantage. She paused. Oh, you said the people you called this morning are working on finding Cross and Hartley long before they have something. I'm waiting on a callback. Then we have time. She looked at Marcus. The front entrance. Leave the side door latched from the inside. Pull the bay door down to 3/4, but don't latch it. I want to be able to open it fast if I need to. She looked at Jack. And I want someone watching the building 2 blocks east. Cross Valley address. If there's activity there, already done, said the man in the doorway, Tommy. Had apparently finished his call and come back inside without Emily noticing. To Jack. Benny and Carver are on it. Jack nodded once. They looked at Emily. You've done this before, he said. A question. I've never done anything like this in my life, she said. Why does it look like you have? She thought about that for a moment. Because the pieces are mechanical, she said. You find out what's moving, what's stationary, what needs to happen in what order. Then you set it up so the outcome you want is the most likely one. She shrugged slightly. Not that different from diagnosing an engine. Jack Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. Sir. Then, for the first time since she had walked up to him in the community center parking lot, he did something she had not seen him do yet. He almost smiled. It was very small. It was gone almost immediately. It was there, all right, he said. We wait. The waiting was the hard part. I only knew this from experience, not from situations like this one. Well, the ordinary waiting of the garage. The waiting while a diagnostic ran, or a part dried, or an engine cooled enough to work on. The waiting that looked like doing nothing, but was actually a kind of active attention, a readiness that required more discipline than action, because action at least gave you somewhere to put your energy. She made coffee, not because she needed caffeine, but because making coffee was something her hands knew how to do, and her hands needed something to do. She made enough for everyone in the garage without asking it into the mismatched mugs that lived on the shelf above the sink, where people could reach it. Dennis Carver took a mug. He looked at it for a moment, then looked at her. How long have you been running this place? He said. 8 years, she said. My dad ran it before me. He teach you everything you know? Most of it. The rest I figured out. Carver nodded. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at nothing for a moment. Then he said, I've been riding for 31 years. Maybe 400,000 miles on bikes in that time. Well, I know a good mechanic the way a pilot knows a good plane. You trust your life to the work. Help a sense for who's doing it right. He paused. What caught Hartley did to my bike myself. Emily shook her head. It was designed not to be caught. The man knew what he was doing. So did you. I saw it by accident, she said. I was doing a routine service on Hendrix's bike, and the modification happened to be adjacent to something I was already looking at. If he had placed it 6 inches further from the caliper mount, I'd have missed it completely. Carver looked at her. No, that's not an accident, he said. That's what paying attention looks like. Before Emily could answer, Marcus appeared from the far side of the bay, moving quickly, and the expression on his face put every other thought out of her head immediately. He said. Dark blue sedan, slow, just past the front of the building twice. The garage went quiet. Was already moving toward Tommy. Carver set down his mug. Their riders near the back wall came off it without a sound. She set down her own coffee and stood very still and thought about the layout of her garage, the 2 bays, at entrance, the window that looked onto the alley, bench that sat between her and the bay door, and positioned herself where she had the best view of all of it simultaneously. Did you see the plate? Jack asked Marcus. Partial. Colorado. Started with a 7. Tommy was already on his phone. I looked at Emily. Does the layout of this building have any other entrances I don't know about? Roof access through the storage loft, or on the east wall interior. She paused. And there's a door in the back of the storage room that connects to the alley. They used it for deliveries. I keep it locked, but it's old and the lock is worn. Jack's eyes went to the man, whose name Emily still didn't know he was large, quiet, and had positioned himself near the storage room entrance 10 minutes ago, as if he had already considered the possibility of that door without being told. Some gave a slight nod that said, already on it. 30 seconds passed, then a minute. The silence in the garage had changed texture. It was alert now, oriented, the silence of people who had stopped waiting and started watching. Chris was at the window, he said. Quietly it stopped. Nobody moved. Marcus said. East side of the street. 2 people inside. Emily felt her pulse in her hands. He said, got the plate. It's a rental. Out of Denver. Jack looked at Emily. She looked at him. A rental car from Denver parked outside Carter's garage in Harlan Creek, Colorado, with 2 people inside on the morning that a carefully planned attack on 24 motorcycles had failed to happen. This was not a coincidence, and everyone in the garage knew it. Not coming in, Dennis Carver said from somewhere behind her. His voice was quiet and absolutely certain. Not yet. They're looking, trying to figure out what they're looking at. How long before they decide? Emily said. On what they see, Carver said, and what they're afraid of. Jack was looking at her. She could feel it without turning to face him. She turned anyway. Older, he said. She understood immediately. Whoever was outside was Cross or Hartley or someone working for them if they were here because the ride hadn't gone according to plan, and they needed to understand why. Then the most valuable thing in the garage right now was not the compromised bikes Cross presumably knew about, the folder she had compiled the photographs, the measurements, the documentation that connected everything she had found to a specific pattern of deliberate sabotage that was something he did not know existed. It stays here, she said. Agreed. And the bikes. Agreed. Then what do we do about the people in the car? Jack turned to Tommy. Tommy was already looking at him. Something passed between them, not words, a communication of some kind, the compressed shorthand of people who had worked together long enough that they didn't always need language. We give them something to see, Tommy said. And that was how Emily Carter found herself, 10 minutes later, walking out of her own garage with a coffee mug in her hand and a clipboard under her arm, moving at the unhurried pace of someone doing routine administrative work. Was with the specific quality of casual she had to work very hard to construct, because everything inside her was doing the opposite of casual. She did not look at the blue sedan. She walked to her truck, opened the passenger door. She retrieved a parts catalog from the seat. She went back inside. She had just handed Hartley or Cross or their representative a picture of a quiet Thursday morning at a garage that had nothing unusual happening in it. Whether they believed that picture was a question she wouldn't know the answer to for another 18 minutes. At the 17-minute mark, Tommy said, "They're moving." Everyone waited. "There's east," he said, turning onto Cross Street. "They're gone." The breath that went out of the garage in that moment was not any one person's. It was the room's. Emily set the clipboard on the workbench. Her hands were perfectly steady. She was somewhat surprised by this. Reynolds looked at her from across the bay. "Good," he said. Phone rang. She looked at the screen. The number was local, a Harlan Creek exchange, but she didn't recognize it. "There," she answered. The voice on the other end was male. Slightly flat, in the way that voices got flat when the person speaking had made a decision they had finished arguing with themselves about. "Carter," the voice said, "I think it's time we had a conversation." Her grip tightened on the phone. Jack was watching her. He had seen her expression change. "This," she said, a pause. "You know who this is," the voice said. "You've been looking at my work all morning." Emily did not put the call on speaker immediately. It was the first decision she made, and she made it in the half second between hearing the voice and understanding what she was hearing. She needed 3 seconds to think before anyone else in the room could react to what they heard. Putting it on speaker would take those 3 seconds away from her. "There. You've been looking at my work all morning," the voice said again. Patient, almost conversational. "I've been looking at sabotage," Emily said. "That's your work, then?" "Yes." A pause. Not a nervous pause. Considered one. The pause of someone who had rehearsed this moment and was deciding which version of it to deliver. "Sabotage is a strong word," the voice said. "I prefer precision engineering." Jack had crossed the garage in 7 steps and was standing 2 feet from her. She could feel the attention of every person in the bay focused on the phone in her hand, like a current moving through the room. Up one finger weight and kept her eyes on the middle distance, the way she did when she was diagnosing something and needed all her processing power in one place. "There's precision engineering that was designed to kill people," she said. "Precision engineering that was designed to deliver a message." The flatness in his voice cracked just slightly on that, not with guilt, but with something more dangerous. Conviction. "There's a difference. 3 minutes speed on a mountain descent with failed brakes," Emily said. "Whatever message you think that delivers, the outcome is the same." "The outcome," the voice said. "Your concern, you called me," she said. "Which makes it my concern." "Why did you call me?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Because you're the variable I did plan for," the voice said. And for the first time, she heard something in it that was not controlled, a thread of something wound tight around the consonants, something that might have been respect and might have been anger, and was probably both. "I planned for the police. I planned for the possibility of a routine pre-ride inspection. Planned for rain, route changes, mechanical delays. Planned for every variable I could identify. A beat, Didn't plan for you. Emily felt something move through her that was not pride and was not satisfaction, but was in the neighborhood of both. And she packed it down immediately because this was not the moment for it. Us, she said. Silence. Then, you've been busy. You called a woman whose garage is full of evidence of what you did and identified yourself, Emily said. Think I'm the one who needs to worry about being busy. She heard him breathe. It was the first sound he had made that wasn't words. It was more informative than any of the words had been. Of a man recalibrating, deciding something. I'm not calling to threaten you, Miss Carter. Then why are you calling? I'm calling, he said, because I want to understand something. You found the modification in Hendrix's bike during a routine service. You had no reason to look further. You had no connection to my history with Reynolds' organization. You had every reason to tell yourself it was a previous repair and move on. Another pause. Didn't you? Emily looked at the folder on her workbench. She looked at 3 motorcycles in her bay. She thought about 5:45 in the morning and the radio she wasn't listening to and the fuel injector she had been thinking about. It was wrong, she said. The modification. It was wrong. My hands knew it before my brain did. That's not an answer. It's the only answer there is. Her voice was steady. You spent 8 months planning something. Clearly an intelligent man. So I need you to think carefully about what you do next, because the situation you're in right now is not the situation you planned for. And the decisions you make in the next few hours are going to determine a great deal about how this ends. A beat. Are you trying to negotiate with me? He said. And there was something new in his voice, not amusement. Something adjacent to it, the tone of a man who had not expected to be surprised and was finding the experience disorienting. I'm trying to give you information, Emily said. What you do with it is your business, but you should know that what I found has been fully documented and is in multiple hands right now. You should know that the organization you targeted is aware of the inside connection. And that investigation is already moving. And you should know, she paused, just for a moment, that the building you're registered at on Cross Street has been under observation since this morning. The silence that followed was the longest one yet. I spoke again. The flatness was back in full. Underneath it, something had shifted. The architecture of the conversation had changed, and both of them knew it. Better at this than you should be, he said. I'm a mechanic, Emily said. I understand systems. This is a system. Reynolds put you up to this call. Reynolds doesn't know I'm saying half of what I'm saying, she said, which was true. Jack was standing 2 feet from her, watching her face, with an expression she had never seen on another human being, the expression of someone who was deciding in real time whether to intervene in something they were not certain they fully understood. What do you want, Miss Carter? Cross said. I want you to make a decision that doesn't make things worse than they already are, she said. For you, for Hartley, for whoever else is connected to this. Because right now, the only thing that's happened is a plan that didn't execute. Nobody's dead. Nobody's seriously hurt. That's still a category of situation that has a certain kind of resolution available to it. She let that sit for exactly 2 seconds. The category closes the moment someone decides to do something about the fact that the plan failed. She heard him breathing again. Let me turn myself in, he said. I'm telling you to think about the difference between where you are right now and where you could be in 6 hours, she said. Oh. The line went quiet for so long that she thought he had disconnected. Then he said quietly, almost under his breath, a man speaking to himself rather than to her, everything from me. Emily felt the temperature of the call change completely. Strategy fell away. The architecture of negotiation dissolved. What was left was just a man on the other end of a line who had been carrying something for 3 years that had crushed whatever he had been before it into a shape she was only now beginning to see clearly. Tell me what happened, she said. She felt Jack shift beside her. She did not look at him. He won't want to hear this, Cross said. Reynolds. Anything I say. I'm not Reynolds, Emily said. I'm a mechanic in a garage in Harlan Creek, Colorado. Told me. So tell me, another pause, shorter this time. Because of a dam that had been leaking for a long time, and had finally found the crack it had been looking for. Meridian contract, Cross said. Reynolds told you about it? He told me the deal fell through. Company restructuring. That's what he told you. Something moved into Cross's voice, not heat, old cousin of heat, the kind of temperature that came from something that had been frozen for a long time. Company restructured because someone fed their board information that made the contract terms look unfavorable. Information about the logistics coordination timeline, overruns that didn't exist, compliance issues that were fabricated. Someone inside the deal poisoned it, and I lost. He stopped. How much, Emily said. Everything, he said. My business. My savings, my marriage, a beat. My son was in college. And tell him I couldn't pay his tuition anymore. Do you understand what that is? To make that call? Emily was quiet, and Reynolds sits there on his throne. Cross said. Old thing in his voice had gotten colder, running his operation, and he looks me in the eye after the deal collapses, and he says, I'm sorry this happened to you. Like he's offering condolences at a funeral, no? Cross's voice cracked on the last word, not with grief, but with the specific fracture of a man who had replayed that moment so many times it had worn a groove in him that he could not stop falling into. He knew, he had to have known. Did you find evidence? Emily said. Reynolds' involvement? Specific evidence? A long pause. Now, Cross said, but who else, Mr. Cross? Her voice was gentle. The way she was firm when she had to tell a customer that what they believed about their vehicle was not what was actually happening. I've spent the last 6 hours looking very closely at Jack Reynolds. I'm not in a position to tell you who poisoned that deal. I can tell you that the man I've been dealing with today doesn't move the way you're describing. The way he responded when I brought this to him, it wasn't the response of a man who knew this was coming. You can't know that, Cross said, but his voice had changed. In it, the 3-year-old certainty that had fueled 8 months of planning had developed a fissure so small she might have missed it if she hadn't been listening at the specific frequency this conversation required. She said, I can't know it completely, but I know machines and I know systems and I know what it looks like when a person is performing a reaction versus having one. And what Reynolds had this morning when I showed him what I found was not a performance. She paused. Forward. There may have been someone inside your deal who sabotaged it. That may be true, but I don't think it was Reynolds. The silence that followed was very different from all the other silences. It was the silence of something shifting, of a structure that had been load-bearing for 3 years beginning, slightly to move. Emily waited. Cross said in a voice that was barely above a whisper, Loretto. Then who? She looked at Jack Reynolds standing 2 feet away from her. She watched his face, and she saw it the thing she had been watching for since Cross started talking. Ignition, small, controlled. But there, Mr. Reynolds, she said, loud to Jack, still holding the phone. He's asking who else had inside access to the Meridian contract. Jack's jaw tightened. She waited. He looked at the phone in her hand. He looked at the bay door. But nothing for a moment that was about 4 seconds long and contained what appeared to be significant interior argument. He said, tell him to ask about a man named Brent Schuler. Emily put the call on speaker. She said, did you hear that? The quality of Cross's breathing changed completely. Cross said, Brent Schuler was the secondary coordinator on the Meridian contract. He worked for my firm. He worked for your firm, Jack said. And his voice was rough, in a way Emily had not heard from him before. He also had a side arrangement with a competitive logistics company out of Denver that stood to benefit significantly if Meridian went to someone other than you. Cross said nothing. I found out 6 months after the deal collapsed, Jack said. By then you had already stopped taking my calls. I didn't know how to reach you. To be honest, Jack stopped. The roughness in his voice had gotten worse. I assumed you understood. I assumed you'd figured it out. I didn't figure it out, Cross said. Quietly, I decided it was you. I know, Jack said. There's silence. This one was the longest, the heaviest, most loaded of all of them. 3 years of a story that had been built on the wrong foundation, sitting in the air between 2 men who had never had this conversation through a phone held by a 27-year-old mechanic who had woken up at 5:45 thinking about fuel injectors. He held the phone and did not say anything. Sometimes the right thing to do was nothing, and she had learned that in the garage too, the moment when you step back and let the system tell you what it was going to do. Cross said. Brent Schuler. Yes, Jack said. That's still working in logistics? He's doing well, Jack said. Has been for 3 years. Cross breathed. It was a ragged thing. That breath. The sound of a man whose entire internal architecture had just been handed a truth it didn't know how to process in real time. Emily said carefully, Mr. Cross, where's Wade Hartley right now? Silence. Why? Because whatever you and Reynolds need to work through, and it sounds like there's a great deal, the most urgent question right now is where Hartley is. Because he's the one with the technical expertise and the willingness to use it, and if he sees that the operation failed, he's not violent, Cross said quickly. Hartley was a technician. He did what I asked him to do because I paid him, and he believed in the operation. He's not a man trained in ordnance who designed a brake failure system that would have put 3 riders off a mountain road is not someone whose next move I want to predict based on a character assessment, Emily said. Her voice was steady and clear. Where is he? A pause. He was monitoring the route, Cross said. At the halfway point. A radio set up. When the rides didn't come through by 10:30, they had to fall back to. Cross stopped. To where? Another pause. Shorter. This one's shorter. The pause of a man making a decision that was going to cost him something, but that he had apparently just decided to pay. The facility, Cross said. Mountain Valley. County Road 7. Equipment there he needed to clear out if something went wrong. Emily looked at Jack. Jack looked at Tommy. Tommy was already at the door. How long ago was 10:30? Emily asked Marcus, taking her eyes off Jack. Marcus checked his phone. 42 minutes ago. Tommy was already outside. Jack said into the phone, Cross. Stay where you are. Move. Do not call Hartley. Do not do anything until you hear from me or from someone I send. Do you understand? A beat? Yes, Cross said. He sounded like a man who had just set down something very heavy and was not entirely sure his legs still worked properly. Have a location I can send someone to? Another beat. Cross read an address. Emily wrote it on the back of her hand because it was faster than finding paper. Jack ended the call. He looked at Emily. Mountain Valley, he said. 32 minutes, she said. Hartley could still be there. He could. Jack was already moving. Stopped after 3 steps and turned back. You should stay here, he said. Debbie looked at him. Because, she said. Jack started to answer and then appeared to reconsider whatever he had been planning to say. He looked at her for a moment, the same reading look he had given her in the parking lot, but was trying to take the full measure of a situation before committing to a response. Because this stops being documentation work if Hartley is still at that facility, he said. This becomes something else. I know what it becomes, she said. I'm still asking why I should stay here. He was quiet. I have a reason, she said. That's fine. Thus, you're staying here. You lock this place, and you don't open it for anyone until you hear from me directly. Thus, on my phone with my voice, not a text, my voice. Marcus opened his mouth. He closed it. She looked at Jack. Let's go. She had never in her life been inside a vehicle moving that fast. Through streets, she knew this well. And the dissonance of it, familiar landmarks at unfamiliar speed, had a quality that sharpened everything to an edge that was almost painful. She was in the back seat of Tommy's truck. Jack was in the front. Their riders were in a second vehicle. She could see through the rear window, held her documentation folder in her lap, and thought about Wade Hartley. About a man trained in ordnance who had spent weeks, probably more, working on those 3 brake assemblies with the patience and precision of someone who loved what they did regardless of its purpose. A man who had built something he was proud of in whatever broken way people were proud of things that shouldn't exist. That something had failed, not failed mechanically, at the deployment level, which was a different and more personal kind of failure. He was at a facility he controlled, with equipment he was trying to clear out. A man who felt personally failed, and with expertise in making things go wrong. How far, she said. 8 minutes, Tommy said. Does your team know not to? They know, Jack said. Confrontation. Eyes only until we know what we're dealing with. She nodded. Her looked out the window at the town, rolling past. She could feel the edges of it now. Place where Harlan Creek's familiar streets gave way to the wider, emptier county roads, and she thought about the inside source. The person in Jack's organization who had handed the route to cross. Something had been nagging at her since Jack mentioned it. A loose thread. The kind of thing that caught at the edge of her attention the way an unfamiliar sound caught at a mechanic's ear. "Fuck," she said. "What?" "The inside source. The person who gave Cross the route. You said his behavior changed 4 months ago. Started asking questions about logistics and scheduling." "That's right. Did Cross know this person before the Meridian contract?" Jack went very still. He glanced at him from the driver's seat. "I don't know," Jack said. If Cross spent 3 years blaming your organization for what happened, and he made contact with someone inside your organization to get the route, I want to know if that contact was something he cultivated deliberately or something that came to him." She paused. "Cultivated it. Your inside source was recruited. If it came to him, then my inside source went to Cross," Jack said. "Which means," Emily said, "that your inside source may have had their own reasons for wanting this to happen. Reasons that had nothing to do with the Meridian contract." The truck moved. Road 7 unreeled ahead of them. Jack said nothing. She could see the back of his neck, and the quality of tension in it told her everything she needed to know about how that possibility had landed. They were 3 minutes from Mountain Valley Auto and Cycle when Tommy's phone rang. A bit on the dash speaker without taking his eyes off the road. They said, "He's there. Vehicle in the lot. Lights on inside. It looks like he's loading something into the vehicle." "How many?" Jack said. "Solo, hold position. We're 2 minutes out." "Copy." But Jack, a pause that carried weight. "He just brought something out of the building. I can't tell from here exactly what it is, but it's not inventory. Case. A hard case, military style." The truck was quiet for 1 full second. "Fuck," Jack said. "Do not approach." Emily looked at the folder in her lap. She looked at her hands. She thought about a man trained in ordnance carrying a hard military-style case out of a building he was trying to clear evidence from. A man who had just had his best work dismantled by a variable he had not anticipated. "Fuck," she said, and her voice was perfectly level, even though the thing in her chest was not. The bomb squad. He already had his phone to his ear. Already. When they arrived at Mountain Valley, Hartley's vehicle was still in the lot. Lights were still on inside the building. The hard case was in the back of his truck, fully visible through the rear window. And Hartley himself was standing in the parking lot, apparently having a phone call, with his back to the road, and completely unaware that 3 vehicles had just stopped 50 yards from the facility entrance, and that one of them contained a mechanic from Harlan Creek, whose hands were still perfectly steady and who was looking at the back of his head and thinking about everything that had brought all of them to this specific moment. Hartley lowered the phone and turned around. He looked at the vehicles. He looked at them for a long moment. Then he looked directly at Emily. She didn't know how he knew which face to look for. Or he didn't. Maybe it was coincidence. The way his gaze moved through the windshield and landed on the person in the back seat who was looking back at him with the most direct attention. But he looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them moved. He reached back into his truck, and every person watching from those 3 vehicles stopped breathing simultaneously. And his hand came out holding not the hard case, not anything from the case, his phone. He held it up, screen facing outward, in a gesture that was unmistakably deliberate. On the screen, visible even at this distance, because the text was large and the screen was bright, were 2 words. Emily squinted. Marcus had better eyes than she did. Marcus wasn't here. She read it twice to make sure she was reading it correctly. The screen said, "I know." She looked at Jack. Jack was already looking at her. "Knows what?" Tommy said. But Emily had already figured it out. She had figured it out in the 3 seconds between reading the screen and Jack looking at her. As the pieces had been moving into position for the last 2 hours, and she had just felt the final one lock into place with the specific physical sensation that she associated with an engine turning over for the first time after a long repair. He knows who the inside source is, she said. He's known all along. That's why he's still here. She looked at Jack. He's not trying to run. Her. Jack stared at her. He's waiting, she said again. Does. Because he has the same evidence we don't have yet. And he's deciding right now whether giving it to you is worth what it's going to cost him. Jack looked at Hartley, standing in the parking lot with a phone screen pointed at them like a flag. Inside source, Jack said quietly. Cross didn't recruit him. No, Emily said. Us, yes. Which means he had a reason. His own reason, Emily said. Something that had nothing to do with Cross or the Meridian contract. Something personal. Something that's been sitting inside your organization long enough that Hartley found out about it before you did. Jack Reynolds sat very still in the front seat of Tommy's truck on County Road 7, outside a facility called Mountain Valley Auto and Cycle. And Emily watched him arrive at the place she had arrived at 30 seconds ago. It was the place where the shape of the whole situation finally became clear. This was never just about Daniel Cross and a failed business deal. It was about something older than that. Something that had been waiting inside Jack Reynolds' own world, hidden in plain sight. The way the modification in Hendrix's brake assembly had been hidden, built with enough expertise to survive casual inspection. There's Connor's sale, designed to fail under specific conditions, placed there by someone who understood the system well enough to know exactly where it wouldn't be noticed. Lee lowered the phone. He put it in his pocket. He sat down on the bumper of his truck, and he waited. He moved for a full 30 seconds. Hartley sat on the bumper of his truck with his hands on his knees and looked at the three vehicles parked 50 yards from him with the particular stillness of a man who had made a decision and was now waiting for the world to catch up to it. And look afraid. He didn't look desperate. He looked courageous. Emily thought like a man who had been carrying something for a long time and had finally found the place he was going to set it down. Jack said very quietly to Tommy, get everyone out of the vehicles. Hands visible. Nobody approaches until I say so. Tommy relayed it. Doors opened. Men stepped out into the gray morning air of County Road 7 and stood where they were, at their sides waiting. Jack looked at Emily. I'm in the vehicle, he said. No, she said. He looked at her. To talk to you first, she said. Whatever he knows, whatever he's decided to do with it, he put that phone screen up when he was looking at me. That's you. She held Jack's gaze steadily. I don't know why, but I'm not going to argue with the data. Jack was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, if this goes wrong in any direction, I'll move fast, she said. Gotta move fast. She got out of the truck. Air on County Road 7 had a particular quality that morning, cold, clean, carrying the smell of pine and dust and the specific emptiness of a road that didn't get much traffic. Emily walked toward Hartley at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow, the pace of someone who had somewhere to be and was confident they were going to get there. She held the documentation folder at her side. She kept her hands visible. Hartley watched her come. When she was 10 feet from him, she stopped. He was older than she had expected, early 60s. There were corners, she guessed, with a face that had been lived in hard and a quality of physical stillness that she associated with people who had spent significant time in environments where unnecessary movement was dangerous. Eyes were pale gray. They moved over her face with a thoroughness that was not threatening but was very complete. Sir, he said. Mr. Hartley. He looked at the folder. But I think it is. Full documentation of what you built into those 3 bikes, she said. Photographs, measurements, technical descriptions, study for the evidence, everything. He nodded slowly. That's good work, he said. And he said it the way a craftsman said it, about another craftsman's work, a genuine professional assessment of any other context. Yours was good work too, she said. What made it dangerous? He looked at her, moved through the pale gray eyes. Not guilt, it wasn't guilt. Nothing harder to name. The recognition of a person who took their skills, seriously, being seen clearly by another person who took their skills seriously. Why did you stay? She said. He looked down at his hands for a moment. Because running would have been pointless, he said. I knew that the minute that phone screen went up and Reynolds' crew pulled in, documentation you built, he nodded at the folder, means there's no version of this where I disappear quietly. Her? He looked back up at her. That left one question. What do I do with what I know? And what do you know? Emily said. I passed her toward the line of men standing by the vehicles, eyes finding Jack Reynolds and resting there for a moment with an expression she couldn't fully read. And who gave Cross your route? Hartley said. Side source. Yes. His name is Roy Altman. Emily felt the name land like a physical weight. Roy Altman, the man whose motorcycle she had inspected that morning in the community center parking lot. Third compromised bike, one of the 6 that had been serviced at Mountain Valley. Woman who had stood beside his bike in the parking lot and watched her find the modification that had been built into it and said in a voice that she had read as controlled grief, all right. His own bike had been compromised. His own brake system had been sabotaged. She heard her own voice before she had fully decided to speak. It was on the compromised list. Yes, Hartley said. Would Cross sabotage the bike of the man who gave him the route? Hartley looked at her steadily. Cross didn't know Altman was the source. Altman made the contact through 2 intermediaries. Cross never knew who inside Reynolds' organization was feeding him information. He paused. Altman never told Cross which bikes to leave clean. He just passed the route. The rest was Cross and me. Emily absorbed that. Altman set this in motion and didn't know his own bike was on the list. Correct. She looked at Hartley. You found out Altman was the source. I'm good at finding things out, he said simply. I do. It's what I've always done. Cross hired me because I could build the technical side of this. I'm also the kind of person who doesn't walk into a job without understanding the full picture. He paused. I traced the route leak back to Altman 6 weeks ago. And you didn't tell Cross? No. Why not? Hartley looked at his hands again. The pause was longer. The pause of a man who was about to say something that was going to cost him something, and who was measuring the cost against something else before he paid it. Because once I found out who Altman was and why he did it, he said, understood that Cross had been carrying the wrong story for 3 years, and the right story was worse. He looked back up at her. The Reynolds. Emily felt the hairs on her arms lift. Tell me, she said. Hartley was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Roy Altman has been inside Reynolds' organization for 11 years. He's respected, he does his job. But 4 years ago, Altman's younger brother tried to start a business and logistics, transport, small operation. He needed a regional contract to get it off the ground. He came to Reynolds' organization asking for a referral. Hartley stopped. Then, Emily said, and the referral never came. Someone in Reynolds' inner circle decided the brother's operation was too small, too risky, not worth the association. The brother's business collapsed inside 8 months. Lost everything. Then Hartley's voice went flat on the last word. Madness of a man choosing precision over emotion. He died. 18 months ago. The official cause was accidental. Altman believes it wasn't accidental. Altman believes his brother gave up. The sound of the wind on County Road 7 was very loud in the silence that followed. Emily did not move. She did not look away from Hartley. What about Roy Altman, standing beside his motorcycle in her garage, getting a mug of coffee, saying, I should have caught what Hartley did to my bike myself. What about the quality of his eyes when he said it? The thing she had read as controlled grief and was now reading completely differently. Guilt. Not grief. Guilt. Altman had set in motion an attack that he believed would hurt the organization he held responsible for his brother's death. Done it through Cross because Cross gave him distance, the ability, the architecture of someone else's grievance to hide his own inside of. When the attack had failed, when Emily's documentation and Jack's response had shut the whole thing down, Altman had stood in her garage, drinking her coffee and saying the right things, and she had not seen it. She had not seen it. That hit her harder than she expected. She stood with it for a moment, the specific sting of having been in the same room as the truth and not reaching it, and then she packed it down the way she packed things down and looked at Hartley. A referral that was denied, she said. Who made that decision? Hartley looked at her steadily. The same person who's standing 50 yards behind you. Emily did not turn around. Hartley's gaze. Reynolds, she said. Reynolds, he confirmed. Oh, personally, I have documentation. Emails, internal communications that Altman gave me because he needed me to understand why he was doing what he was doing. Emily breathed slowly, through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she breathed when she was under an engine and the work required steadiness. Hard case in your truck? Documentation, Hartley said. Same kind you've been doing all morning, but mine is about the inside of this organization. Altman gave me what I found independently, the full chain of who knew what and when about Altman's brother's request and what happened to it. She looked at him for a long moment. Urban, you built the brake modification that could have killed 3 people, she said. Oh, and you're sitting here with evidence that you're willing to hand over. I need you to help me understand which version of you is the real one. Hartley didn't flinch. Of them, he said. That's the honest answer. I took Cross's money and I did what he asked because I believed his version of events and because I needed the work and because I told myself the message was what mattered. He paused. I was wrong about some of that, not all of it, but enough. He looked at the folder in her hand. You documented what I built. I documented what they built. Seems fair. 3 people could have died. Yes, he said. He said it without deflecting, without qualifying, the architecture of justification that most people reached for when they said something that terrible. He just said it and let it be true. That's the version of me that's going to answer for this. Look, I know that. Emily looked at him for another moment. Then she turned around. Jack Reynolds was watching from 50 yards away. She could not read his face at this distance. She walked back toward him, not the careful pace she had used approaching Hartley, getting faster, more direct, and when she was close enough to speak without raising her voice, stopped. Roy Altman, she said. She watched Jack's face. He moved through it like a current of fast, old, deeply interior movement that was there, and gone in the time it took him to blink. Or, she said, it was not a question. I suspected, Jack said. But his voice was rough again. This morning, when you found his bike on the compromised list, I told myself I was wrong. You weren't. He was quiet. He has documentation, she said, about Altman. Why? She paused. And about the referral. Altman's brother. Jack closed his eyes. It was the first thing she had seen him do that was not controlled. Just for a second, the eyes closed, the jaw tightened, and she saw the full weight of it move through him. Then he opened them again. His name was Kevin, Jack said. Kevin Altman. He said the name like a man handling something fragile. I remember when the request came in. It was a bad time. We had compliance issues, coming back from new associations. I made a call, a business call. He looked at her. I didn't know what happened to him afterward. Did you know about Roy? Roy never said anything. His voice had gone to a place she hadn't heard it go before, not guilt, but its first cousin. The specific grief of a man who had just understood that a wound he didn't know he'd caused had been bleeding for 4 years inside, someone who sat at his table and rode at his side and never once said a word. Never said a word. Emily looked at him because he decided words weren't what he wanted anymore. Jack was very still. Documentation Hartley has, Emily said, Pum. He's willing to hand it over, all of it. The evidence about Altman, about Cross, how the inside contact worked. In exchange for, she paused. I don't know what he wants yet, but he's sitting on his truck waiting to tell someone. Jack looked past her at Hartley for a long moment. Cross, he said. Cross is sitting somewhere in this town, having the worst morning of his life and trying to figure out if the story he built 3 years of his life on was even real. She paused. The man he blamed for destroying him had nothing to do with it. Brent Schuler did. Schuler is still out there doing well. Us is here. Jack's jaw tightened. Schuler, he said. Look, that's a separate problem, Emily said, and it's not mine to solve. Us needs to know clearly from someone he can believe that the man he targeted was the wrong man. You want me to talk to him? I think you're the only person who can, she said. And I think you know that. Jack looked at her for a long moment. The assessing quality was back the full text reading that he had been doing since the parking lot, and she held still under it, the way she held still when a machine was telling her something, and she needed turbos to receive the information without interrupting it. There. You've been doing this all morning, he said, moving between people. Translating. Mechanics do a lot of translating, she said. Machines can't speak for themselves. Someone has to read what they're saying and put it in language the room can use. He was quiet. Then he said, "Where's Altman now?" She had been waiting for that question. Got out her phone and called Marcus. He picked up on the first ring. "Hello. You okay?" "I'm okay." "Marcus, is Roy Altman still at the garage?" A pause. "Left about 20 minutes ago. Said he had somewhere to be." "Emily," he looked wrong. "I should have said something sooner." He just okay." "Do you know which direction he went?" "North on Main." "Harry, north on Main." Emily looked at Jack. "On Main, 20 minutes ago." She thought about the geography of Harlan Creek, what sat north on Main, about where a man who had just watched his plan fail completely and was starting to understand that things were unraveling faster than he had anticipated would go when he needed to think. She said slowly. "Ridgeline Tavern, a mile north. It's the kind of place you go when you need to sit alone and it's too early for anywhere else to be open." She looked at Jack. "I don't know Altman, but I know what that kind of leaving looks like." Jack turned to Tommy. "We're at Ridgeline." Tommy moved. Jack looked at Emily. "Come with me." She fell into step beside him, and they walked toward Tommy's truck, and she said, "What are you going to say to him?" Jack was quiet for 5 steps. Then he said the truth. "All of it, all of it." His voice was rough and steady at the same time. A combination of qualities that she had come to associate with him over the course of this morning, the sound of a man who carried significant weight and had learned to walk with it rather than under it. The referral, about Kevin, about the fact that I didn't know and that I should have followed up and that I didn't. He paused. About the fact that none of that changes what Roy did, but that it changes what I owe him. Emily looked at him. She said. "The truth," Jack said again. "The room to hate me for it, if that's what he needs. And then we figure out the rest from there." They got into the truck. He was already moving. The drive to Ridgeline Tavern took 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, Emily sat in the back seat and thought about Roy Altman's face in her garage, the face she had read wrong, the signal she had missed. She thought about what it was like to carry something for 4 years inside a group of people who were supposed to be your family, telling nobody, doing your job, riding at every charity ride and every organized run and every scheduled meeting, carrying a weight that had no outlet because the person you held responsible was also the person you depended on. About her father, about what it would have done to her if she had lost the garage because of someone's offense business decision and had no way to say so. The specific slow damage of grief that has nowhere to go. I understand why. That doesn't make it right. I understand why. Tommy parked. They went inside. Roy Altman was at the far end of the bar with a glass in front of him that he hadn't touched. He was staring at the middle distance with the expression of a man who has run out of the story he was telling himself and has nothing left to fill the silence with. Up when they came in, he looked at Jack first. At Emily. Something moved through his face complex, fast and very human, the kind of expression that happened when a person was confronted with the reality they had been trying to outrun and discovered, as people always did, that it had been waiting for them at the destination. "Hey," Jack said. Altman looked at his glass. "You know," he said. "A question?" "Yes," Jack said. Tommy stayed by the door. Stayed 3 steps behind Jack, far enough to be outside the conversation, but close enough to be present in it. The same instinct she had developed in the garage over years, the instinct for where to stand so you could see everything without disrupting anything. Jack pulled out the stool beside Altman and sat down. Altman looked at him. His eyes were dry and his face was controlled, and the only thing that betrayed the full scale of what was happening inside him was his hands, which were flat on the bar and pressing down harder than they needed to, just slightly white. "Kevin," Jack said, The name. Nothing else. And Altman's face broke. Dramatically. Not loudly. The way things broke when they had been held together by will for a long time, and the will finally ran out a quiet collapse, settling, the face reorganizing itself around a grief that had apparently been looking for a way out for 18 months and had just found one. Pressed both hands over his face and sat there for a moment. Huck sat beside him and did not speak and did not touch him and did not look away. He simply waited with the specific quality of presence that Emily had observed in him all morning, the ability to be completely still in the middle of something that was moving very fast. Altman took his hands away from his face. His eyes were red but dry. "How did Jack?" "He called me," Altman said. His voice was rough. "The week before. He called me, and he sounded okay. Or, he said things were looking up. He said he had a lead on something." He stopped. He breathed. "That was the last time I talked to him. And then I found out what happened, and I found out about the referral." He stopped again. "Roy," Jack said, "I didn't know about Kevin. What happened after the referral was denied?" Altman looked at him. The expression on his face was complicated in a way that Emily didn't try to fully decode. Too many incident things layered on top of each other. Too much history, too much grief, too much anger that had been living in the same house as that grief for too long. "Would it have mattered?" Altman said. Jack was quiet for a moment that was very honest. "I don't know," he said. "I want to say yes. I believe yes. I don't know, and I'm not going to lie to you and say I do." Altman looked at him for a long time. Emily watched them from her 3-step distance and felt the weight of the room, the specific gravity of two men sitting at the far end of a bar on a Thursday morning in a mountain town in Colorado. One of them carrying a plan that had failed and a grief that had not. They're carrying a decision he had made 4 years ago that he had not known the full cost of. Altman said very quietly, "I put my own bike on the list." "I know," Jack said. "It wasn't." Altman stopped. "I didn't know it was mine until this morning when she found it." He looked at Emily for the first time directly. "When you found it, and I stood there and I thought, maybe this is what I deserve. I don't know which side I was on." His voice broke on the last word, and he steadied it with visible effort. "I've been telling myself for months that I was doing this for Kevin. Kevin would have hated it. Kevin would have told me I was being a coward and hiding behind his name." He pressed his hand flat on the bar. Would have been right. The bar was quiet. The bartender had apparently decided that whatever was happening at the far end of his establishment was above his pay grade and had positioned himself at the other end with his back to them. They said, "Where does this go now, Roy?" Altman looked at him. Something settled in his face, not peace, but the cousin of peace that arrived after a long fight, tired that came from putting something down rather than from being beaten. "Whatever it needs to," he said. "I'll talk to whoever I need to talk to." Then what I did. He paused. "I want Schuler looked at. For Cross. That man lost everything chasing a story that wasn't true because Schuler built it. That should matter to somebody." "It will," Jack said. Altman nodded. He looked at his glass. He pushed it away from him an inch, 2 inches, the specific movement of someone deciding something about themselves. Then he looked at Emily. "You saved lives this morning," he said. "Mine included, I know. You don't know that yet. But I was on that mountain route." He paused. "I was going to ride it anyway. I was going to ride my own compromised bike down that pass." He held her gaze. "I don't know if I was hoping to make it or not." The silence in the bar after that sentence was very complete. Looked at Roy Altman and felt the full weight of what had been set in motion on this morning land on her all at once, not abstract, not theoretical, not a documentation project or a chain of evidence or a mechanical analysis. There's people, the specific and irreplaceable weight of human beings who had been hours from the worst moments of their lives and had arrived here instead. Our stool in Harlan Creek, Colorado, because she had woken up at 5:45 and thought about a fuel injector and noticed something that her hands knew before her brain did. She did not say anything. There wasn't anything to say that wouldn't be smaller than the moment. She just looked at Altman and nodded. Once, the way she had nodded at Dennis Carver in her garage that morning, the nod that said, "She stepped away from the bar to answer it, And the voice on the other end was Marcus. Whoa. And he sounded different from how he had sounded any other time that morning. Higher, faster, the specific quality of someone reporting something they had just seen and not yet fully processed. "Ellie," he said, "someone just came into the garage." She felt her attention sharpen immediately. "Oh, I don't know. I don't recognize him. He said he was here to pick up a bike for service. I told him we were closed. Said he'd wait. He's Emily. He's not looking at the bikes. Sure. He's looking at the workbench. He's looking at where your documentation was. Is the folder still there? No. Sure. You took it. But he doesn't know that. He's looking for it." A pause with something. "He found your notes, the handwritten ones, documents you wrote on the yellow legal pad before you compiled everything." Emily turned around and looked at Jack. "And is in my garage right now, looking for the documentation," she said. "Was already standing up." "Who sent him?" Jack said. "Don't know yet." She was already moving toward the door. "Marcus is alone in there with him." She was outside before she finished the sentence. Tommy's truck was already running. Tommy's truck covered the mile back to Carter's garage in 90 seconds flat. Emily spent every one of those seconds on the phone with Marcus, keeping her voice even, keeping him talking, the way her father had once told her, "You kept an engine running when it wanted to quit steady input. That pressure, don't let it feel you panic." "Is he still by the workbench?" she said. "Hello," Marcus said low. "He's near the back, near the storage room door." The storage room door, old delivery entrance, the lock that was worn. "Nurse," she said very calmly, "I need you to walk to the front of the garage and stand where you can see both him and the street door. Explain it. Just move naturally. Tell him you're going to check if there's a scheduling conflict on the computer." She heard him breathe. "Oh, do it now." She heard footsteps. She heard Marcus say, a voice that was almost convincingly casual, "Hey, just check our system real quick. Make sure we don't have a conflict on that pickup." A pause. Sure. The sound of movement. Then Marcus again in her ear. "Hey, I'm at the front." "Good. Is the front door unlocked?" "Yes, leave it that way." Tommy turned onto Main. She could see the garage from here, the bay door. At 3/4 as she had left it. Entrance, the ordinary face of the building that contained something that was not ordinary at all. "We're 30 seconds out," she told Marcus. "When we pull up, you're going to hear the truck. You don't react. You don't look at the door. Stay exactly where you are, and you keep talking to him about whatever you're talking about." "Emily, who is this guy?" "I don't know yet," she said, "but I'm about to find out." Tommy stopped the truck half a block from the garage. "There." Jack put his hand on the door handle and looked at Emily. "Visible as before," he said. "You go first. I'm behind you." She nodded. She got out. She walked to the front entrance of Carter's garage with the folder under her arm and her keys in her hand. Moving at the exact pace she used every single morning when she arrived for work, not fast, not slow, completely ordinary. The walk of a woman who owned this building and had every right in the world to be walking into it. From the front door and went inside. Marcus was at the computer, exactly where she had told him to be. He looked up when she came in, and his face did the thing faces did when relief arrived, too fast to be hidden, a brief, voluntary softening. And she gave him a look that said, "Steady," and he steadied. The man near the back of the garage was somewhere in his 40s. Medium build, wearing a jacket that was slightly too warm for the morning, but which meant something underneath it that he didn't want visible. The yellow legal pad in his hands, and he was looking at it with an expression that was trying to be casual and was not quite getting there. He looked up when Emily came in. She looked at him the way she looked at a machine that was presenting unfamiliar symptoms, direct, gathering information. "Can I help you?" she said. He set the legal pad back on the workbench. "I came to pick up a bike. I at the desk said you were closed." "We are closed," Emily said. "What's the name on the order?" A pause. Half a second, maybe less, but she caught it the way she caught the half-second hesitation in an engine before a misfire. "Here's Henderson," he said. She went to the computer beside Marcus, put up the scheduling system, looked at it for 5 seconds. "I don't have a Henderson in the system for today," she said. "Grissom. Last name only, or Gary Henderson, he said. And yesterday. I have a Gary Hendricks from Tuesday, she said. That bike's been picked up. He looked at her. She looked at him. The distance between them was about 15 feet, and the air in it had a particular quality that she had come to recognize over the course of this morning, the quality of a situation that was one decision away from becoming something else entirely. The front door opened behind her, and Jack Reynolds walked in. Son's eyes went to Jack. Something moved through them fast, voluntary, the specific kind of recognition that happened when a person saw something they hadn't expected and their body registered it before their face could catch up. First, he knew who Jack was, which meant he knew exactly what had been happening this morning, which meant he was not here to pick up a bike. Emily set the folder on the counter. She kept her hand on it. She looked at the man and said, in the same even voice she had been using since she walked through the door, "Who sent you?" He looked at the folder. He looked at Jack. He looked at Emily. And then he did something that none of them anticipated. He sat down. A dramatic gesture, not a surrender posture. The man, who was apparently very tired, pulling out the nearest stool and sitting on it, and pressed both hands over his face in the exact same gesture Roy Altman had used 40 minutes ago at Ridgeline Tavern. He said, into his hands. Brent Schuler sent me. The name detonated in the room like something physical. Emily felt Jack go very still behind her. She felt Marcus stop breathing beside her. Her own hand tighten on the folder and deliberately relax it, finger by finger, because she needed her hands loose and ready, and she needed her mind to be faster than her reaction. Brent Schuler, the secondary coordinator on the Meridian contract, a man who had poisoned the deal and destroyed Daniel Cross and walked away clean, and spent 3 years doing well, while Cross spent 3 years building a plan to punish the wrong person for it. Miller knew. He knew that Cross's plan had failed, but that the investigation had started. He knew that the name Schuler was somewhere in the conversation because Hartley had it. As Cross knew it now, because the chain of events that Emily had set in motion that morning was moving in a direction that was going to reach Brent Schuler no matter how far back he stood. He had sent someone to find the documentation, to find out how much was documented and whether his name was in it. Emily looked at the man on the stool. "What's your name?" she said. He took his hands away from his face. He looked like someone who had been employed to do a simple job that had turned out to be not simple at all, and was now recalculating everything in real time. "Pete," he said. "Pete Garza." "What exactly did Schuler ask you to do?" "Pete?" Garza looked at the folder. "Find out what was in the documentation," he said. If a name came up, a specific name he wanted to know. "His name, yes. And if you found it?" A pause. "Specify," Garza said. He just said, "Find out and call him." He looked at his hands. I used to work for him 6 years. Drive trucks for Cross Valley routes now. I've been for 2 years. I thought. He stopped. "I didn't know this was connected to what happened this morning. Called me an hour ago. Said it was a simple thing. Look at a garage." Emily looked at him for a long moment. "Pete," she said, "I need you to call Schuler back." Garza looked at her. "Right now," she said, "and I need you to tell him that you found the documentation and his name is not in it." The room was completely quiet. Garza said slowly, "But his name is in it, I know," Emily said. "Tell him anyway." Jack said nothing. Marcus said nothing. The room held itself very still around the conversation the way rooms did when something significant was being constructed inside them. Garza looked at Emily for a long moment. He looked at Jack. He looked at the folder. Then he took out his phone. Called Schuler. It rang twice. A voice answered. She couldn't hear the words, but she could hear the tone, clipped and controlled. A man trying to sound like someone who was not waiting anxiously for this call. "There's Pete," Garza said. His voice was steady. "I looked through everything. Documents, photographs, repair records. The name's not there." A pause while the voice on the other end said something. "Okay?" "Nothing." Another pause. "Yeah, I'm sure." He ended the call. He set the phone on the workbench and looked at Emily. He said, "Because now he thinks he's safe," Emily said. "People who think they're safe stop being careful. She picked up her own phone and called the number she had entered into it 45 minutes ago, the federal contact Jack had connected her to during the drive to Mountain Valley. The woman named Agent Teresa Voss, who had asked Emily to keep her phone on and had said, in the dry professional tone of someone who had been doing this for a long time, that the morning was developing in interesting directions. Voss picked up on the first ring. "I have a name you need to run right now," Emily said. Brent Schuler, Colorado-based logistics, former coordinator on the Meridian contract approximately 3 years ago. He just received a call from a contact inside this situation, telling him the documentation is clean. But he believes he's not in it. You have, I would estimate, 2 hours before he figures out that's not true and does something about it. A brief pause on Voss's end. Of someone typing. "Spell the last name," Voss said. Emily spelled it. "How confident are you in the connection?" Voss said. "Emily documented it independently," Emily said. "Voss can corroborate it. And I have a witness who just received direct instructions from Schuler to search this garage for evidence of his name. A witness is present and willing to make a statement." She looked at Garza. He nodded once, with the expression of a man who had made a decision about which side of this he wanted to be on, and had arrived at it faster than he had expected. 20 minutes, Voss said. "You have 15, Emily said. "Let's start thinking soon." She hung up, was looking at her from across the garage. He had not said a single word since he walked through the front door. That silence had been the most useful thing he had contributed to the last 10 minutes, the specific restraint of a man who understood when to step back and let someone else run the engine. "Schuler's the one who poisoned the Meridian contract," Emily said to the room, as Garza was still there, and he deserved to understand what he had just stepped into the middle of. He held Daniel Cross's business and walked away. Cross spent 3 years blaming Reynolds. Roy Altman spent 4 years blaming Reynolds for his brother. All of it traces back to Schuler. Garza sat on his stool and looked like a man reassembling his understanding of the last 6 years of his professional life. "Of his trucks," he said. 2 years. I thought he was... He stopped. "No," Emily said. "That's how it works. The people who do the most damage are usually the ones who seem the most ordinary from where you're standing." She looked at Jack. "Us is going to need to hear Schuler's name from someone who can prove it," she said. "From me, not from Hartley. From someone with access to the original contract records who can show him specifically what happened." "I can get those records," Jack said. "You can," Emily said. "That's why I'm telling you." He looked at her steadily. Altman. She had been thinking about Roy Altman since they left the bar. She had been thinking about a man who had put his own bike on the list and ridden toward a plan he wasn't sure he wanted to survive. She had been thinking about Kevin Altman, who she would never meet, his brother the week before, and said things were looking up, and who had not been believed by the most important person in his world, not Jack Reynolds, Brent Schuler, but the universe itself, which had declined to offer the small mercy of a door opening at the right moment. "Altman did something that can't be undone," she said. "He knows that. He said he'd talk to whoever needed to hear it." She paused. "Whatever that process looks like, that's between him and the people whose job it is to figure it out. It was to find what was in the machines. I found it." Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need right now?" Emily looked around her garage. There were compromised motorcycles, still in the bay, documented, still waiting. The yellow legal pad on the workbench with her handwritten measurements, with the full technical report. Marcus at the computer, there, looking like a man who had aged 3 years in one morning. Garza on a stool, staring at the middle distance and working through something large and private. "Coffee," she said. "And then I need to write an addendum to the documentation covering Garza's arrival, Aldous Schuler, and the timeline of this morning from approximately 10:15 onward." She looked at Jack. "And I need someone to take the hard case from Hartley's truck and make sure it gets to Voss without being opened by anyone except her." Jack turned to Tommy, who was standing in the garage doorway. Tommy nodded and was gone. Marcus put the coffee on without being asked. Emily sat down at her workbench and opened the folder and picked up a pen. She wrote for 40 minutes without stopping. She wrote with the same precision she had brought to everything that morning, every detail, every timestamp, every word she could reliably reconstruct from the conversations she had been part of, every inference she had drawn and the specific evidence that supported it, every action she had taken and the reasoning behind it. She wrote in the voice she used for technical reports, clear, stripped of everything that wasn't factual. And when she was done, he read it back once, made 3 corrections, and added her signature at the bottom. She had just capped her pen when Agent Voss called. "Miller's in federal custody," Voss said, without preamble. He made 3 phone calls in the last 12 minutes, last of which was to a contact in Denver who has an existing file with us. It was, as you predicted, about 2 minutes after, he apparently reconsidered the situation and decided the garage call was too clean. A pause. "Going to have a good afternoon." Emily exhaled slowly. "Documents are coming to you," she said. "Hard case, military style. Your people should have it within the hour." "Already confirmed," Voss said. "Sir, I've been doing this work for 19 years. The chain of documentation you built this morning, time frame you had, with the resources you had access to, I want you to understand that what you did today is not something most people could have done." Emily was quiet for a moment. "I just read the machines," she said. "That's all I know how to do." "That's everything," Voss said. "Sometimes that's everything." The call ended. Emily set down her phone and sat in her garage and let the quiet land on her for the first time that day. The loaded quiet of the last 8 hours, the sharp, watchful quiet of a situation that could break in any direction, but something softer than that. Quiet of a room after the hardest part of the work is done, when the hands can finally rest and the mind can finally let go of the thing it has been holding. Marcus set a mug of coffee in front of her. She wrapped both hands around it. Reynolds was still in the garage. He had been there the whole time she wrote, standing in the same corner he had occupied when the compromised bikes first came in, as if he had not felt he had the right to leave until something was finished. Him now, and he looked at her, and neither of them said anything for a moment. He said, "I owe you something." "You don't," Emily said. "I do," he said. "And I'm not going to argue with you about it, because you've already won every argument today." He looked at the garage around him, the bays, bench, the tools on their racks, the whole ordinary infrastructure of the place that Thomas Carter had built and Emily Carter had kept. "Whatever you need for it. Parts, referrals, contracts. You say what, and it happens." Emily looked at him. "Yeah, I did this." "I know," he said. "That's why the offer means something." She looked down at her coffee. About the fuel injector she had been thinking about. At 5:45 that morning, about the long distance between that thought and this moment, she felt something in her chest that was not quite pride and not quite grief and not quite relief, but was made of something from all 3. "A kid," she said, "in Pueblo. Marcus knows him. He graduated from the technical school last spring. Good hands can't find a shop that'll take him seriously because he's 19 and nobody wants to take a chance on someone without 5 years of experience behind him." She looked at Jack. "Arbors, if you have any connections in the regional shop network, but if you could put a word in somewhere." Jack nodded. He said. "And the referrals," she said, "I'll take them. I charge my actual rate, and I don't cut corners. If I find something wrong, I say so regardless of who's waiting for the bike." "I'd expect nothing less," he said. Right for a moment. Then Jack said, in a voice that was different from any version she had heard it take all morning, quieter, just less constructed, the voice of a man speaking from somewhere below the level where he usually operated. "My people are going to want to know who to thank this morning for what you did." Emily shook her head. Tell them someone noticed what the machine was saying," she said. "Acted on it. That's all." Jack looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something that she would remember for a long time. He put out his hand. The handshake of a business arrangement or a formal agreement. The handshake of one person to another, person to person, acknowledgement that something real had passed between them. She shook it. His grip was firm and brief and entirely honest. Then he said to Tommy, who had reappeared in the doorway, "Oh." He walked to the door. He stopped with one hand on the frame. "Sir," he said. "Reynolds," she said. "Sir." The sound of motorcycles starting in the street, outside, not three compromised ones, the ones in her bay, but the clean ones, the sound of 21 engines that were going home, moved through the walls of the garage and then faded north toward the mountain road they had not taken that morning. Emily sat in the quiet that remained. Erga had given his statement to Voss's people and left 20 minutes ago with the look of a man who had driven into town expecting a simple job and was going to spend the next several weeks thinking about the consequences of simple jobs. Marcus was at the workbench, sorting through the documentation copies, organizing them with the particular careful attention of someone who had learned something today about why precision mattered and was applying that lesson in real time. No cross, she would learn later that afternoon, had walked into the Harlan Creek Police Department at 2:15 and asked to speak with someone about a situation he needed to report. The officer who took his statement would later describe him as completely composed and completely honest, a man who had decided what the truth was going to cost him and had made his peace with paying it. He had already been in federal custody for an hour. By then, hard case transferred to Voss's people intact, operation documented, the specific shape of whatever his future held, beginning its slow process of definition through channels that moved carefully and did not hurry. Altman's situation was more complicated. It would remain more complicated for a long time, but he had made his calls as he said he would, and he had told the truth as he said he would, and whatever the weight of that truth cost him going forward, he was the one carrying it now rather than the ghost of his brother. And Schuler's good afternoon was, as Voss had predicted, one. Emily finished her coffee. She looked at the three motorcycles in her bay, Hendrix's Road Glide, Carver's, Altman's, and she stood up and went to work on them. The document this time, to fix. She started with Hendrix's bike because that was the one where everything had started, and she worked methodically backward through the modifications Hartley had made, removing each altered component and replacing it with the correct part from her stock, comparing each system to the condition it should have been in before someone with ordnance training and a contractor's fee had touched it. She worked for 3 hours. Marcus worked beside her without speaking, giving her what she needed before she asked for it, the way he always did when they were deep in something real. When she finished the last bike and straightened up and wiped her hands on a rag, late in the garage had gone from the flat white of morning fluorescence to the longer light of late afternoon coming through the bay door. Pierce stood back and looked at the three restored motorcycles. "That was funny," he said. She looked at him. "This morning, when I got here and you told me what you'd found, I kept thinking, why did she notice that? Why her? There were how many mechanics that touched those bikes? Mountain Valley had staff. Reynolds' people did their own pre-ride checks. Multiple professionals looked at those same components and saw nothing." He shook his head slowly. "In a routine service on a Tuesday afternoon, because you were paying attention to something nobody else thought to pay attention to." Emily looked at the three bikes. "My dad used to say," she said slowly, "that machines don't lie. They can't. They only tell you what's actually true about them, if you know how to listen." She paused. "People think mechanics fix what's broken. But mostly what we do is hear what something's been trying to say and figure out the right language to answer it in." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You heard it." "Yes," she said. "I heard it." She turned off the bay lights. The compromised components properly bagged and tagged now, of evidence intact in the secure storage cabinet. She looked at her garage, the same garage it had been at 5:45 that morning, the same tools on the same racks, the same mismatched mugs on the shelf above the sink, the same ancient inkjet printer that had printed the documentation that had been in so many different hands today. Same garage, different weight to it now. A history that it hadn't had this morning added to it, the way machines accumulated history not visibly, on the surface, present in every system, every component, every adjustment that the day had required. Emily picked up her keys. She locked the front entrance. She stood on the sidewalk outside Carter's garage in the late afternoon light of a Thursday in Harlan Creek, Colorado, and she breathed the cold mountain air that smelled of pine and dust and the particular cleanness of altitude. She felt the full length of the day settle into her bones the way long work settled heavy. And hers. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize, then immediately recognized. Jack Reynolds was not the kind of man who used words carelessly. It said, Gary Hendricks is asking about his bike. Says he'll come by tomorrow. It would be ready. She looked at the text for a moment. Then she typed back, it will be. She put the phone in her pocket and walked to her truck. She got in, she put the key in the ignition and sat there for a moment with her hands on the wheel before she started it. The way she always sat for a moment before she started the engine, not because she needed the pause, as she had learned from years of working on machines that the moment before something starts is worth attending to. She had woken up that morning thinking about a fuel injector. She had stood in the road in front of 24 Hell's Angels motorcycles and raised both hands and said, stop. She had read a machine that was telling the truth about something terrible, and she had listened to it and she had acted on what she heard. And because she did, 24 men were sleeping in their own beds tonight instead of in a hospital or a morgue. She had done it alone. Her help, authority, without anyone's permission. She had done it because she knew what she knew, and she trusted what she knew, and she refused to stay quiet about it when staying quiet would have cost more than she was willing to pay. Her had called it a gift. She turned the key. The engine started her engine, the engine she knew every sound of, the engine that told her every morning in its particular voice that everything was as it should be. She sat for one more second and listened to it. Then she put the truck in drive and headed home. Some people spent their whole lives waiting to be taken seriously. Spent one morning making it impossible to be anything else. Here's the difference. That had always been the difference.